In the dead of night, under the highest security ever seen, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, once the world's most powerful drug lord, was taken away to ADX Florence, the most secure prison in America. Here, behind layers of steel and concrete, some say life meets a fate worse than death. From a life of lavishness and limitless power to 23 hours a day in a concrete box, how did El Chapo's empire come crashing down to this reality? And why do many argue that existing in this Supermax prison is a fate more terrifying than death itself? Joaquin Guzman, known worldwide as El Chapo, began his journey in a poor family in rural Mexico. Despite his humble beginnings, his ambition drove him to join the organized crime world early in his life. El Chapo's cunning and ruthlessness quickly set him apart, allowing him to climb the ranks within the notorious Guadalajara cartel. Eventually, he founded his own criminal organization, the Sinaloa Cartel, named after his home state, becoming one of the most powerful drug lords ever seen after the era of Pablo Escobar. Under El Chapo's leadership, the Sinaloa Cartel flourished, pulling in an estimated $3 billion annually. His empire was vast, controlling major portions of the drug trafficking routes into the United States and beyond. El Chapo's influence wasn't just monetary. He had significant sway over local communities and even law enforcement. Allegations suggest that many officials were either bribed or intimidated into compliance, securing a near untouchable status for him within Mexico. El Chapo's criminal activities eventually led to his capture by the Mexican army on June 9, 1993. However, his initial arrest was merely the beginning of a series of dramatic confrontations with the law. Sentenced to 20 years, El Chapo was placed in a maximum security prison in Mexico, from which he famously escaped in 2001. He did so by hiding in a laundry cart, an audacious plan made possible by bribing numerous prison guards, including a compromised guard who organized the escape for a hefty sum of $2.5 million. This escape embarrassed the Mexican authorities and highlighted the extent of El Chapo's power. In 2014, after being on the run for years and still leading his cartel, El Chapo was captured again. Despite increased security measures, he managed another astonishing escape in 2015 from the Altiplano prison. This time, his escape involved an elaborate 1.5-kilometer-long tunnel equipped with lighting, air ducts, and a motorcycle on rails, starting from a construction site to the shower area of his cell. El Chapo's freedom was short-lived after his second escape. His notoriety and the embarrassment he caused law enforcement led to an intense manhunt. In 2016, he was captured once again by a joint operation involving the Mexican Navy, the DEA, and the U.S. Marshal Service. This arrest followed extensive surveillance and intelligence operations that tracked his movements meticulously. Realizing the challenges of keeping him detained in Mexico, the authorities decided to extradite him to the United States. Once on American soil, El Chapo faced a trial that would put an end to his days of dramatic escapes. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment plus 30 years in ADX Florence, a place from which escape was deemed impossible. ADX Florence, located in Colorado, is known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, and for good reason. This 37-acre Supermax prison is designed to be a fortress, housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the world. The external security measures are extreme. The prison is surrounded by gun towers and razor wire fences, with patrolling guards armed heavily at all times. Motion detectors and a plethora of cameras monitor every movement. Inside, the facility is divided into a series of control units, each one a self-contained pod that includes cells, a control center, and areas for solitary recreation. The doors are made of solid steel, with every opening and closing controlled remotely from a secure control center that can shut down sections of the prison at the press of a button. Pressure pads and 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors ensure that no unauthorized movement goes undetected. The daily life of an inmate at ADX Florence is harsh and isolated, designed to minimize contact with others and prevent any form of escape. Each inmate, including El Chapo, spends approximately 23 hours a day in a small concrete cell measuring around 7 by 12 feet. These cells are equipped with a bed, desk, and stool, all made of poured concrete, along with a combination toilet and sink. The tiny window is designed not to allow any view of the surrounding area but only the sky, to prevent inmates from getting any sense of the layout and thus planning an escape. The minimal human contact is a cornerstone of the ADX Florence regime. Inmates interact mostly with prison staff during mealtimes or the rare medical and legal visits under strict supervision. Communication with the outside world is severely restricted, with all phone calls and mail screened for security threats. Recreation for inmates at ADX Florence is nothing close to leisure. Each inmate is allowed 1 hour of recreation per day in a small, enclosed area that resembles a concrete pit, high-walled and covered with metal bars. This area is designed to prevent any view of the prison layout. Here, inmates can walk 10 steps in one direction or 30 in a circle. Interaction with other inmates during recreation time is non-existent, as each inmate is contained in their own separate area. Privileges such as access to a small black and white television or books are contingent on the inmate's behavior. These privileges are considered luxuries in a place where sensory deprivation is the norm. The television, when allowed, offers limited programming, and books are often the only form of mental escape from the monotony and isolation. In ADX Florence, every aspect of an inmate's life is controlled and monitored, designed to maintain security, but at the cost of severe psychological stress for the inmates. This extreme level of confinement aims to prevent incidents and manage the most uncontrollable offenders, but it also raises questions about the balance between security and basic human dignity. The environment is so austere and the regime so strict that it arguably makes ADX Florence not just a prison, but a form of living purgatory. Extended solitary confinement, like that experienced in ADX Florence, has profound effects on the mental health of inmates. The human mind is not designed for extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. In such conditions, many inmates develop severe psychological disorders. Depression is common, characterized by a deep sense of hopelessness as inmates face day after day in the same small, featureless cell with minimal human contact. Anxiety is another frequent symptom, with inmates living in a state of constant fear or nervousness, often about their safety or the uncertainty of their future. More severe mental health issues can also arise, including psychosis. Psychosis can involve hallucinations or delusions brought on by the lack of sensory stimulation. Inmates may start hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, or developing false beliefs about their environment or themselves due to the extended isolation. These conditions are not only distressing, but can also exacerbate the challenges of managing and rehabilitating inmates. The brutal mental toll of life in ADX Florence is best illustrated through the testimonies of those who have lived it. Former inmates often speak of the isolation as being torturous. One inmate described it as being buried alive, where the silence of the cell becomes overwhelming and the walls seem to close in physically and mentally every day. Another former inmate shared that the lack of human contact made him feel like he was disappearing from the world, a ghost among the living. Psychological experts corroborate these experiences, explaining that solitary confinement can lead to a condition known as SHU, Special Housing Unit Syndrome, which is marked by panic attacks, depression, paranoia, aggression, and increased suicide risk. Dr. Stuart Gracian, a psychiatrist who has studied solitary confinement extensively, found that such conditions often induce a state of neurogenic stun myocardium, a condition where the brain begins to shut down emotionally and cognitively in response to extreme stress. In ADX Florence, even the minimal recreational time is governed by strict security protocols. In the case of El Chapo, known for his history of escapes, The precautions are particularly severe. During his 1 hour of recreation time outside his cell, he is heavily shackled. These restraints include handcuffs and leg irons, severely limiting his ability to move freely. The recreation area itself is a small enclosed space resembling an empty concrete pit, designed to prevent any form of escape and minimize physical activity. Surveillance during this period is intense. Cameras are positioned to cover every angle, and guards are stationed at secure points, watching every movement closely. The combination of physical restraints and relentless surveillance ensures that inmates like El Chapo cannot use this hour for anything other than the most basic of physical activities. El Chapo's experience in ADX Florence is defined by extreme isolation, a common strategy used to neutralize high-risk inmates. His ability to communicate with the outside world is extremely limited. All of his communications, including letters and occasional phone calls, are thoroughly screened for security breaches. Conversations during visits are monitored, and physical contact is typically disallowed, conducted through thick plexiglass using telephones. This isolation extends to virtually all aspects of his daily life, with interactions with prison staff and other inmates being highly controlled and infrequent. The cell where El Chapo spends 23 hours of his day is designed to minimize comfort and maintain maximum security. The cell is small, roughly 7 by 12 feet with walls of solid concrete. The furniture in the cell is also made from poured concrete, including a bed, desk, and a stool, all bolted to the floor. These are not only uncomfortable but also reduce the risk of them being moved or used as weapons. The amenities in the cell are equally austere. The shower in his cell is controlled and runs on a timer to prevent flooding and misuse. Similarly, the toilet has anti-flooding measures. It automatically shuts off if blocked. The sink has no taps. Water control is external. These measures are not just about maintaining cleanliness, but are precautions against self-harm or using these facilities to create tools for escape. Inmates at ADX Florence, including El Chapo, exist in a permanent state of high alert due to the prison's extreme security measures. Every sound or movement might signify a check by the guards, and every interaction with the outside world is carefully monitored and controlled. This constant surveillance, combined with the extreme limitations on movement and communication, induces significant psychological stress. Inmates are always on edge, aware that their every action is being scrutinized. This continuous stress can lead to long-term psychological issues, such as severe anxiety, paranoia, and mental breakdowns. The psychological toll is exacerbated by the lack of meaningful human interaction, which is a fundamental need for psychological well-being. Another aspect that makes life in ADX Florence potentially worse than death is the sheer hopelessness that pervades the environment. For El Chapo, sentenced to life plus 30 years, there is virtually no chance of release. This reality, combined with the daily rigors and restrictions of Supermax life, means there is no real hope for change or improvement in his conditions. This hopelessness can be crushing, as inmates face the prospect of decades in the same small cell, under the same strict routines, with the same limited interactions with the world. The mental and emotional strain of knowing that one's circumstances will not improve can be as debilitating as physical torture. Finally, life in ADX Florence effectively removes inmates from society and the sensory experiences of the world, which can be a fate considered worse than death. Inmates like El Chapo are confined to their cells for 23 hours a day, with minimal exposure to natural light, fresh air, or any natural sounds. The sensory deprivation extends to interactions with other people. Inmates rarely see anyone besides guards and occasional visitors behind glass barriers. This removal from the normal stimuli of life and the isolation from the broader human community can lead some inmates to feel like they are already dead to the world, existing as mere shadows of their former selves. Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this.